Okay. Well, welcome to the channel once again. I'm your host, Randy Broussard, and have a very special guest. He decided to, we decided to do a part two of our conversation with Gary Hill. Gary, of course, is a longtime JFK assassination researcher. Spent 50 years researching the Cold War and the JFK assassination. He appeared on lots of talk shows, published articles, giving lectures on the topic. He was also recently at the JFK assassination conference, which I had the pleasure of meeting Gary in person. And that was very, very interesting. Welcome back, Gary. I appreciate you putting
Thanks
up
for having
again.
me. Thank you.
As you know, as we spoke about the last time, lots of information, a lot of information I was not aware of. Your book, of course, I want to mention that, The Other Oswald. I got it right this time. And it just, I want you maybe to kind of maybe recap a little bit what we talked about. The character Robert Webster, whose lives, he's and Oswald lives are just paralleled, as they're both supposed defectors, went to Russia at the same time, came back at the same time, how things transpired after that, and how when they came back here, I'm really particularly interested in that, and Marina's role, and she was not, there was no coincidence that she and Oswald met and got married so quickly, and
Right.
exactly the girl next door either.
Yeah.
If you kind of recap a little bit, what
Okay. Sure.
Don't mind.
Of course, Webster defected 2 weeks before Oswald did, and came back 2 weeks before Oswald did. Had a Russian woman, had a child to a woman in Russia, and so forth. But there was a lot more to their relationship as far as coincidences go. And it's in '63 when JFK was shot. Some things were going on. The FBI had a report from Cleveland, Ohio, their Cleveland, Ohio office, that an anonymous person called in. And this is usually a lot of the sources in the JFK thing are anonymous people that call in. And you get to suspect that, are they really anonymous or are they setting up something? So anyway, they got a report that Oswald was living in a hotel room with a prostitute in Cleveland, Ohio, and that they were going to go to Dallas, and they knew, and Jack Ruby was involved in the whole thing. So they had this story of this anonymous person. So they go to Cleveland and they interview this woman and all this stuff, trying to find out what was going on. And the day of the assassination, they're interested in Webster. So they go to his place of work to find out if he was at work on the 22nd of November. And he was. So they kind of dropped it. But this was before they got the report about the prostitute in Cleveland. In other words, they couldn't have gone to look for him because of that. What they found out that Oswald wasn't in Cleveland, but Webster lived near there or had lived in Cleveland.
So they had the report that Oswald was living in Cleveland?
No, yeah, it was said Oswald, but then they determined that it was Webster.
Okay.
Okay, because their names are both in the FBI document. So it tells you right away that maybe Webster was using Oswald's name and associating with a prostitute in Cleveland before the assassination. And another reason that they were checking on Cleveland was that Ruby's name was mentioned, and Hoover wanted to find out how Ruby was involved in this whole thing. It's complicated. It's much clearer in my book, but I'm just, going over it quickly. But anyway, the point is, they were interested in Webster, and they probably thought that maybe him and Oswald were working together because they had been in the Soviet Union together. Maybe they were part of a Russian, programmed to kill Kennedy or whatever. But and then they had another report that Oswald had left his family in Zelienople to go to Russian defect. And so they checked on Zelienople, and they checked with the police, and there was no Oswald living in Zelienople, but Robert Webster lived in Zelienople and left his family for. So the point is this: people were confusing the two guys together, and that was part of the plan. When if they were both involved in this mole hunt that James Angleton was running, and they went as defectors to the Soviet Union to be part of this mole hunt, they wanted the Russians to confuse them, and they did. Yeah. They used their same weight and height. They used Webster's height, 5'10", 165 pounds, as the description for both. And of course, Oswald was 5'9", maybe 140. But what's funny about that was in Oswald's file. And
I heard something about that. Yeah.
It was part of a mole hunt thing, whereas we're going to put false information in Oswald's file. And if it comes back to us, then we'll know who the mole is, because it'll be sent, So that was the thinking.
Can you explain a little bit what a mole is? I'm sorry to.
Okay.
Might not know.
Yeah. Well, a mole is a spy inside an agency. And this mole was Popov's mole. Popov was a Soviet intelligence agent who was a traitor to the Soviets, and he was meeting with a CIA guy that was handling him overseas. And it was Popov that told his agent that they had a spy in the CIA, very high up in the U-2 program.
Mm-hmm.
This was called Popov's mole. And in espionage work, everything is so complicated because everyone's trying to fake everyone else out. So now, as it turns out, well, what happened was Angleton was obsessed with this mole in the CIA, and he wanted to find it because he had been, Kim Philby was a British spy, British agent, and he was one of the top British agents for years and years, and him and Angleton were very close friends when they were working during World War II with OSS. And so the British and the American agents were working together. It turned out that Philbrick was a traitor. He was a Soviet spy, and he escaped and went back to Russia. And Angleton never got over that, became paranoid. He didn't trust anybody anymore because he had trusted Philbrick. Now he was told there was another spy high up in the CIA, and he was going to find this spy through this mole hunt. And Oswald was his best pocket agent. What that is an agent that works for him that nobody else knows about. Okay. So in 1959, at least in 59, maybe earlier, Oswald he was the only one that had files on Oswald. He was the only one that was handling Oswald. And Oswald goes to the Soviet Union as part of this mole hunt.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it really gets complicated because John Newman, the writer, the researcher, the PhD who worked in intelligence, is one of the top researchers in the world, has written several new books, and the last one is that he's uncovering Popov's mole. And he believes he has found Popov's mole. And Popov's mole was a guy named Bruce Soley. And Bruce Soley was very high up in the security division of the CIA, and he was very close friends with Angleton. And it's Newman's contention that it wasn't Angleton running this mole hunt. It was Soley. It was a fake mole hunt. So Soley was looking for himself. He sent this over there so that he could control the mole hunt so they wouldn't find him. So he convinced Angleton that the mole was in the Soviet-Russia division. And so therefore, they had two files on Oswald, and one of the files they kept just for themselves, and didn't share with the Soviet division or with anybody else, so that if the Soviet division came up and said, oh, well, Oswald was 5'10", 5'10", 165, they got that information from the Soviets, so it's complicated. But anyway, to make a long story,
They wanted to be complicated, probably.
Absolutely. They were faking each other out. They were even faking out their own people.
Wow.
Even the people in the CIA didn't know departments, even people that worked together. One would know stuff and the other one wouldn't. It was like, and the most secretive person in the whole place was Angleton. He was paranoid, schizophrenic. So anyway, so what happened too is, so now the Soviets are confusing, right? And by the way, as soon as the assassination happened, and they sent out on the radio description of the shooter, it was 5'10", 165 pounds. Now, where did they get that information? They got it from these files. They got it from intelligence. In other words, Kennedy gets shot, and right away, zap, they're sending information on Oswald before they even know that he's missing or anything. I mean, already they're framing it, and that was the plan. They had the information out almost as soon as the assassination happened. So anyway, so not only was Oswald being confused by those people, but Oswald was also being confused by Marina with Webster. She told one of her White Russian friends that she met Lee at a trade exhibition in Moscow. Oswald was not at a trade exhibition in Moscow. Webster was. It was Webster. So she's already confusing Webster with her husband. And as it turns out, I have some documents, and I'm working on a new book, and I have some documents that are really interesting. They got some documents from the Soviets. And in this document that I have, the Soviet agency comes out and says that Oswald was considered an agent for them. However, what they considered an agent was anybody that gave them any information at all. And what would happen, he was in Minsk, and the Ukrainian KGB would get points if they had American spies working for them. So anybody that moved into that area who came from America, they would claim as a spy. They would claim as an agent. Okay. And so he really wasn't an agent in the classic sense that he was working for them, but he may have given them information, and he may have been told what information to give them because he was probably working for Angleton or whoever. So what we discover in this document is that Marina was a swallow. They called her a swallow, which is a prostitute who worked for intelligence, like honey traps, to trap.
I've never heard that before till you.
Yeah. Well, I have the document. They call her.
Oh.
And Norman Mailer kind of uncovered this. This is really interesting. Norman Mailer went to Russia, and he got years ago. He was writing a book about Oswald. It's called Oswald's Tale, I think, something like that. And he had been supposedly, according to the book, he had been believed it was a conspiracy. Then he went to Russia, and the Russians give him all this information, and they give him interviews, and they talked to him. Well, they wouldn't talk to anybody else. No other researchers could get over there and get. I don't know how this kind of stuff is strange, because certain people get to talk to people, and they're usually like Jared Posner or somebody like that. That's so they get special treatment. So he talked to an agent, and he talked to friends of Oswald's there, and they said that they had bugged his apartment. They had recorded conversations between him and Marina, knew all about him, decided that he was a nut, and they didn't want any part of it. Of course, they're covering their own rear end. But anyway, the CIA discovered a program that the Russians had to deal with the fake defectors. They were sending women home with the defectors. They would get a woman would get close to them, marry them, they'd go back to the United States, divorce them, and they'd be a sleeper agent in the United States. It was a way to get them into the United States. And so what I believe happened was that Marina was one of these swallows, and she probably approached Webster first in Moscow because he was there first. And then she found out that he was married in the States, so he couldn't marry her. He was, even though he had this Russian girlfriend too, that was another reason. He had a Russian girlfriend, so she couldn't have come home with him, and then she switched to Oswald. But what's funny is after Moscow, they sent Webster to Leningrad, and he worked in plastics. When he got Soviet citizenship, and they let him take this girlfriend he had, Vera, with him as an assistant to translate. And he worked in a plastics lab in Polytech plant in Leningrad. And he lived in this apartment house. And Marina had, after the assassination, they got Marina's diaries, papers, and they found his address in her address book. So she's got his address. So not only did she say she married him, and she didn't in Moscow, she has his address in Leningrad that she had visited. So she gave a couple different stories as to what that was about. She said it was a guy named Lev Prezentsev, and that he was in love with her girlfriend who was married, and she was like in between person between the two, and so forth. Then later she said it was an old guy she knew at a rest home. She changed her stories like she always does. So they ran a check on Prezentsev, and there was no such person. But they found that Robert Webster lived there. So what was going on with him and her in Leningrad, I think by then he was living with Vera. So I don't think she could have, seduced him there. She may have been visiting me as a prostitute trying to get information, which is possible. She was actually, Mailer discovered that she was ejected and from Leningrad, and she moved to Minsk to live with her uncle, who was MVD. He was in Soviet intelligence. And so her story was she went to live with him in Minsk after her mother died, because he was supporting her and this and that.
That's a story, though. Huh?
Yeah, it's her story. Well, it turns out that Oswald had a really good friend in Moscow, in Minsk, named Ernest Titovets. And Titovets wrote a book, and it's a really interesting book because I like it because he was close to Lee, and has insights into what was going on over there in the Soviet Union. And he said, I don't know if it was him that said it or it was another guy. He had said that it was strange how he met her at this dance at the Palace of Culture, that and they were introduced by this guy named I can't remember his name. It's Russian, Mariventsev or something. This guy introduced them. It turns out that Naylor got to interview this guy, and the guy said that Marina was thrown out of Leningrad for prostitution.
Oh, okay.
And her uncle saved her by letting her come to Minsk, because she would have went to a work farm in the forest. They sent prostitutes and people that didn't have jobs to cut trees. They called it 101 kilometers. In other words, you were sent far away, 101 kilometers, to work in the forest. And she got out of that because of her uncle being MVD, and he went to live with him. So you can't believe much of what Marina ever says because she changes her story all the time.
And she changed it a lot with the Warren Commission.
Oh, yes, she did. And even they said you couldn't trust her.
Right.
So, but by the same token, don't forget that she was being persecuted. They were threatening to deport her. And so she would tell them whatever they wanted to hear, because she was, under duress.
Have you met her at all? Have you ever? Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I want to. I've been trying to get. I'm supposed to do an interview, I don't know if it's a radio or television interview with this woman in December, and she knew a person that Marina trusted, and he could get through to her. And I wanted her to talk to Scott Webster because Scott was Robert's son.
Yes.
And there's a connection there, and she might open up to him. But the woman was supposed to get back to me before the Dallas thing, and she never did. So I don't know, but I'm supposed to do a show for her in December, and maybe I can find out about it. Try to get through to Marina then. But Marina's in her 80s now, and who knows? But like I said before, there was something going on. The Soviets were using her, and she came home with. But I think what happened was that, and when they met, it was, I'm going to go home with this guy. I'm going to get him to marry me and take me to the United States. Part of it was she wanted out of Russia. She was poor, and she was a material girl. She liked all the things she could have in the United States. And Oswald was interested in her because he had been rejected by the love of his life, which was a woman named Ella German, who worked with him at the factory in Minsk, and he proposed to her.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and she rejected him, so he was going to get even with her and Marina. But at one point, I really believe they fell in love. They fought all the time and everything, but I think that he loved her and she loved him when it was all. Sometimes people that fight all the time are the ones that are, the most in love.
That's how they express their love, I guess.
Yeah, and once she got back to the United States, the Soviets said she was no help to them at all. She, rejected them. She just wanted to get there. So she's not a sleeper agent or anything. So we have all these people that confused the two guys, and that was intentional, I believe. And from that point on, the rest is history. It's just a matter of what. Webster was abandoned after he came back, and he
did you say that? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you say that when they got back from Russia, Oswald was never really debriefed or?
No, well, officially, officially, he was never, according to the CIA or whatever, it was never debriefed, which is a bunch of baloney. The guy went went to the American embassy in Moscow and threatened to give secrets to the Russian. Right. And technically, at that time, he was still in the reserves, and an MP at that embassy should have arrested him right there, because he was still in the Marine reserves, and he wasn't, susceptible to them. But they didn't, and he lays his passport down, and he threatens to give up his citizenship. Of course, the embassy is bugged, and he knows it. The Russians are listening. I'm loyal to the Soviet Union, and I'll give secrets, and I'll do this, and I'm giving you my best. That's all for their ears, of course. And the guy that he was giving his passport to, that was in charge of the embassy, was a guy named Richard Snyder, and Richard Snyder was CIA. So Snyder knew what he was doing. So, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
In on it, I guess.
Yeah. In on it. Yeah. Well, and then I discovered. So Snyder says, "Well, I can't take your passport today because it's Saturday, and the embassy is closed officially. So you have to come back Monday." Of course, Oswald never came back on Monday. Then I found out Webster did the same thing on a Saturday too. He went to the embassy on a Saturday. Really? And then I found that out that another defector named Petrulli went on a Saturday. So I call it the Saturday strategy. Come and dump your passport here, and we'll keep it for you, because we can't, we're not open. And then they don't come back to get it, until they're ready to come back to the United States, and they get it back. It was safekeeping. So the Soviets didn't get it, that type of thing. But
Right.
Oswald did all this, and then he comes back and nobody cares. He shows up, he comes in on a boat, called a freighter called the Mozdam. Him and Marina show up at this pier in New Jersey, Hoboken, and there's nobody there. There should have been reporters. There should have been FBI. They maybe even arrest him, that for what he did. Instead, nobody's there, which is absurd. Only one there is this guy named at my age, my names they come and go out of my head.
Know the feeling.
Anyway, this guy was like supposed to meet people that come. He worked for aid, for traveler's aid, that kind of thing. But he was really involved in a lot of other CIA type things. So he comes and meets them, and he's the only one. Webster comes home. Now, Webster gave up his citizenship, became a Russian citizen. Then he decides to come back, and he has to come back under the Russian quota because he's not an American citizen. And he goes through hell. He comes home, and there's 200 people at the airport waiting, reporters, friends, And then the FBI and the Congress, he has to go be debriefed by all these agencies, and it takes weeks and days and so forth. I mean, he goes through hell and high water, and he didn't offer to give secrets like Oswald did. So why was he debriefed and Oswald not? It makes no sense. I mean, the way he was handled tells you that he was special, that he could get away with doing things because they knew he was one of them. They knew I think they did debrief him, but it was quietly done so that no one knew. Marina said they stopped at this house in Amsterdam and stayed for a day or two. And that was a safe house, probably, in Amsterdam. And they probably debriefed him there, CIA. But he come home, and on the way back, he thought he would be. So he sat in his stateroom and he wrote a bunch of questions he thought he would be asked. And he wrote answers. But what's strange is he had two sets. He had one set that he would answer as a patriot, a Marine. Well, I just went over for this reason, and I didn't deep secrets, and I didn't do. The other one was as a Marxist. So, in other words, he was either unsure of who he was going to be talking to, or what the questions would be, or he had this split personality of two people. He's a patriot, he's a subversive, and he has answers for each side, depending on which side is being interviewed.
Right. You mentioned in your book about MK Ultra.
Yep.
That kind of figure into this?
I believe it does. I really do. I've been doing a lot of research on MK Ultra, and this is the perfect thing they wanted for MK Ultra. They wanted to.
Can you explain what it is, if you don't mind?
Okay, MK Ultra was a mind control program done by the CIA. It was very secret. They used LSD. They bought up the whole world's supply of LSD because it was a new drug, and they thought they could use it to control people's minds or create assassins or create patsies, whatever they wanted. And they tried all these. It was inhumane what they did, and they experimented on prisoners in prisons. They experimented on patients in hospitals. They experimented on mental patients. They experimented on without their knowledge, usually, and they tortured them. They did horrendous things. What they do is they would finance. There was a Canadian doctor in Canada that had Dr. Ewan Cameron. He was involved in this kind of research. So they funded him. And he was actually turning people into vegetables who were coming for mental health. They were coming to get help, psychiatric help. And they would drug them keep them in bed for weeks, listening to recordings over and over and over again, and giving them electroshock treatments, so that they were trying to clean their mind, brainwash their mind, clean their mind to create a new personality. And some of these people ended up, completely ruined lives. They did all, and they just did stuff all the time. They brought Nazi doctors over here to do it. They brought Japanese doctors over here. So, and when it was discovered by the church committee in the 70s, Richard Helms had all the files of MK Ultra destroyed, so they wouldn't know.
No surprise there.
A couple sneaked through, and now we know about it. And so what I found out was that as for Oswald, he was stationed at Atsugi in Japan, which was the U-2 base, but it was also a CIA base, and it was also one of 2 or 3 MK Ultra bases in the whole world. So he's stationed at this place, where he's in proximity, and then he disappears from the Marines. He gets court-martialed. He's in the brig for 2 weeks. He's in the hospital. And this is time for them they use a technique called psychic driving, where they give them electroshock treatments and the things I was telling you about.
That was administered to him.
Probably. And then when he come out of the brig, his roommate said he was a different person. Instead of being this easygoing Aussie the rabbit, they called him, he became this angry individual, different. So they did something to him while he was in there.
And that's the personality that we know about.
Yeah. The Marxist, the Marxist but he had joined the Marines at 16. He memorized the manual. He wanted to be like his brother. He wanted to be a patriot. But then I found this. When Oswald was a kid and he was in New York City, he was truant. They picked him up.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. Well, they took him to this institution for juvenile boys, and this doctor, Renatus Hartogs, was a psychiatrist there and interviewed him.
Well,
and
3 minutes left.
Oh, geez.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So this Hartog's testimony is in the Warren Commission, saying that he was disturbed and all this stuff. Well, now, 50 years later, I discovered that place was called Bordentown, and it was MK Ultra, and that Renardus Hogtogs was involved in the MK Ultra problem. So possibly as early as his 13 years old, they had access to him then, and then in the Marine. So none of this is accidental. They probably monitored him. It was
handled way back when.
Yeah, and Webster worked for Rand Development, and Rand Development had a mind control department. They had a guy named Christopher Bird who worked on mind control, and they were working in it. And I found a document that said, an MK Ultra document, sub project 79 of the MK Ultra project was through Rand Development.
Gary, that's great. So interesting. That's all the time we have. I'm sorry. How can people get in touch with you, get your book? And
well, my book's on Amazon, or Barnes and Noble, or you can get it from Trine Day Books, or you can get it from my website. And if you get it from my website, I'll sign it. It's called theotheroswald.com. And I also have a Facebook page by the same name. But anyway, I could go on all day.
Yes, well, together again sometime. Thank you so much.
Okay,
it's been a pleasure, Mr. Gary Hill, and I urge everyone to read the book, The Other Oswald. Great read. Thanks again, Gary.
Thank you, Randy. Bye-bye.